My name is Gina Belafonte. I'm from the US. I am an artivist, which means I work at the intersection of art and activism. I wear multiple hats at home, doing many different things. And one of them is I am the CEO of or the executive director of a nonprofit organization that I founded with my father. It's called sankofa.org. And at Sankofa, we use art as a tool to educate, motivate, and activate artists and allies in service of grassroots movements and equitable change. So I wanted you to know a little bit of my background and sort of what also brings me here today. But I'm not going to talk so much. What I'd like to do is bring up to the stage three incredible women who will all deliver a talk to you about what they're doing in the world, how they're walking through the world, what they're focusing on. And then once each one of them has spoken a bit about who they are and what they do and what they're focusing on, we'll get into a dialogue, and maybe if there's time, we'll open up for questions. So first, pick any seat you'd like. I'd like to welcome Bettany Hughes to the stage, an award-winning historian, author, and broadcaster. She has written a book called The Return of Kori, Persephone, The Feminine Origins of Eleusinian Mysteries. But I also know she's going to talk to us about other things that she's into and what she's doing. Next, I'd like to invite Hélène Pichon to the stage, founding member of the International Women's Forum and author of the manifesto. Now, I don't speak French, so bear with me. Le Éternel en féminine, not bad. The Eternal through the Feminine. And next, I would like to welcome Indra. Am I saying that right, Indra? Indra Adnan, founder and co-initiator of the Alternative Global, a socio-political platform serving systemic transformation, and someone who also very much focuses on the conscious feminine. So I will invite Bettany to begin, and we'll go right down the line, and then we'll hopefully come into conversation.
Thank you so much, Gina. Kalisperas, everybody. What a total delight it is to be here. First of all, as you may know, I'm a massive Helene, so how wonderful to be here in Greece. How wonderful to be just a stone's throw away from a sanctuary that honoured two fantastic female deities, Demeter and Persephone. And also, how fantastic that this session starts with an event talking about the sacred feminine. I mean, I know that 10 years ago, it would have been really, really hard to get that topic even on the agenda of a summit and a symposium like this, but we're starting with the first panel. So thank you to the genius organisers, Alexandra, Mirto, everybody. Also, I do think we should just give a little practical logistics shout out for the fact that they managed to get many of us here on a ferry through a military manoeuvre to retrace the route to Eleusis that would have been done by ancients. So just thank you and congratulations. As some of you know, I'm a historian, and as most historians should do really, I spend my time trying to fill in the gaps in history. And obviously, one of the greatest glaring gaps is 50% of the human population, women, who, whether you like it or not, have actually been more than 50% of the human population through time. But we occupy around about 0.5% of official recorded history. It's very, very hard to find the female voice when you look back through history. But all is not lost because we have archaeology on our side. So just what I want to do really, really briefly today, and don't worry, it's not going to be a long talk. I'm just sort of throwing some ideas out so that we can have a dialogue, a conversation about them, is to look at what archaeology tells us about the female experience and particularly the sacred feminine experience through time. So as I said, it's tough in history. There are beautiful things that are written about women in literature, but if you actually look at recorded history, we are conspicuous by our absence. However, in archaeology, we are conspicuous by our presence. So if you look at all human figurines that are made between the years of about 40,000 BCE and 5,000 BCE, across the world, so not just in Europe, but across the world, between 95 and 96% of those human figurines are of the female form. So that is extraordinary if you think that the communities who are creating art are thinking about what it is to be female and about women when they're generating human figurines. We're also there in these beautiful inscriptions. I don't know if any of you have been to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is one of the, it's a very interesting site. It looks like actually people were coming together to have some kind of religious experience, and that's one of the things that encourages us to settle down. If you look at Göbekli Tepe, which is around 11,000 years old, there are massive 16-ton carved columns, and something which is often overlooked is there's a central slab, and on that central slab there's an image of a woman. Everything that can happen to a woman in terms of gender and sexuality, I have to say, is happening. So it looks like she's having a period and giving birth and having sex at the same time. But she is absolutely there. She's centrally there. And then if we move from prehistory into history, so the times that we have records, we hear of women beautifully in poetry. So many of you will know this, but the world's oldest and earliest named author is a woman. So it's a woman who was both a princess and a priestess in Babylon. She was called Enheduanna. Quite why the world doesn't know this is positively shocking. She should be a household name. And I should just say that when her poetry was discovered in 1927, the white male archaeologist who discovered her gave her just half a page in his archaeological research notes, even though she was the first named author in human history. And just listen to some of the poetry that Enheduanna writes about the goddess that she worshipped, Inanna, who is I've actually written a book about Venus and Aphrodite, and Inanna is really the kind of great-great-great-grandmother of Aphrodite, who appears here in Greece, so a goddess of war and sex, of love and pain of all kinds. And this is what Enheduanna writes about Inanna, her great goddess. Just got to put my specs on. Lady of blazing dominion, clad in dread, riding on fire-red power, flood, storm, hurricane adorned, battle planner, foe smasher. So that is a goddess that needs to be taken note of, far from just a pretty face. And again, if you actually think about how Aphrodite appears in the Greek pantheon, she's not the wafty creature that we see ending up on Valentine's Day cards with kind of long blonde hair, just sort of all kind of drifting around on a Renaissance bed of spring flowers. She's an incredibly feisty and ferocious creature. So we hear about those goddesses. We also hear about the women who wrote about them, like Enheduanna. And then if you come down to very close to us, to the Mycenaean civilization in the Bronze Age in Greece, we know that women could own land. So we hear on these Linear B tablets that they have something called onarto, which are sort of portions of land which are taxed. We know that they can give land, so that territory is often inherited through the female line, which explains a lot of things, including the kind of wonderful story that you will all know of, the basis of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, the story of Helen of Troy, who of course was Helen of Sparta, just a bit further south in the Peloponnese, where all the known heroes of Greece, first of all, come to fight for Helen's hand and for her land, because it's through her that they acquire the territory of Sparta, and then travel across the seas to try to bring her back. So we know that women are there if we look at archaeology. They're there, if you like, in the DNA of culture and human civilization. But then something very bad goes wrong. When we look at the stem cell of the human story, women are denigrated and downgraded and damned. So if you think about it again, that beautiful story of duty and desire, Homer's incredible epic, the Iliad and also the Odyssey, in this, Helen, who is actually a dignified and resourceful queen, is described as a nasty, scheming bitch. This is how these are the words that she's given to describe herself. She's presented to the world as a weapon of mass destruction. We hear that the world travelled across and suffered great toil for fair-tressed Helen's sake. So suddenly she's not a heroine. She's absolutely an anti-hero. And the theme continues. As I said, just to put it out, I am a huge Philhellene. I love the Greeks and what the Greeks do. But their record in terms of women is not perfect when it comes to what they wrote about them. Just listen to this. This is Simonides of Amorgos, who was writing in the 7th century. And this is how he describes women. This was, by the way, a very, very popular poem that was kind of shared on the streets of the great cities. Yes, women are the greatest evil that Zeus has ever made. If someone imagines a woman to be of any use, she will cause even more trouble for the man in her life. A man's good spirits never last a whole day when that day includes a woman. Yes, women are the greatest evils Zeus has ever made, and men are bound to them hand and foot with impossible knots tied by the gods. It's no wonder that Hades itself waits around the corner for men at each other's throats over women. And it carries on. I won't read you the rest of the poem. You can look it up yourself, but it describes all the things. It compares women to foxes and dogs and vixens, and the fact that if they talk too much, they should have their teeth knocked out by a stone. So it's not exactly a kind of, rosy feminist wonderland that we have here in Greece. It continues. Hesiod describes the first created woman as Pandora, but also as Kalon Kakon, the beautiful evil creature, evil because she's beautiful, beautiful because she's evil. And Aristotle, the great philosopher about whom there is so much to admire, says that when a woman looks out, the kind of pollution from her eyes, from her sort of the darkness of her inner soul, can actually turn a glass dark. And he says there's scientific proof that this is the case. And as you probably know, Aristotle was used as the basis of medical texts right up until the 19th century. So we have a bit of a problem when it comes to how women are represented, and particularly women in society. But I'm not going to be depressing. There is hope, and there was hope too in the ancient world, because just to speak to Jeremy's point, culture realized this was an issue, and what you have in systems need answers, but culture, particularly a strong culture, can always ask questions. And so the Greek culture asked questions of themselves and wondered why they'd got to this state. So we have Plato, of course, the other great philosopher, foundation of Western philosophy. In his Republic, he says, if you think of society, and 50% of that society, i.e. women, are not active, then surely the world can only ever be a half of itself. It's a kind of really interesting philosophical question that he poses. This is obviously 2,400 years ago. Quintus of Smyrna, who was an author who wrote a sort of alternative to the Homer's epic, he gives these beautiful words to one of the Amazonian queens, which fascinatingly is actually the basis for Shakespeare's famous Shylock speech in Merchant of Venice. And we hear from the Amazon queen, she says, I'm a woman, but as a woman, do I not breathe? Do I not feel pain when I'm struck? Do I not smell the grass on the ground? Do I not see the stars in the sky? So again, a really interesting question that Quintus of Smyrna is asking everyone. And Hesiod, going back to the 7th century, so 2,600 years ago, when he talks about the deified structure of the world in his Theogony, one of the things that he says, which is also in a Homeric hymn, we hear that Gaia, the great goddess Gaia, And just to say, you're talking about our need to understand the cosmos as unified and humanity's part in that. The Greeks, as ever, they got there first. 2,600 years ago, they were absolutely saying with the concept of Gaia, we're completely integrated, we're not separate from nature, this planet is part of the greater cosmos too. But Gaia says, 2,600 years ago, I have to rid myself of the burden of humanity, because she sees that even back then there's a degree of industrialization which is causing problems for Gaia. So culture asks these questions very robustly of itself, and that's why Alexandra's idea for the World Human Forum, of where all these disciplines, science and culture and economics, can meet, is absolutely essential, because we can ask questions of each other. So I promised I wouldn't be depressing, but just to say, it's an interesting case where we know women are there, but we have to really search for them in the historical and archaeological record. But as I say, all is not lost. Two, I think, very beautiful ideas that I would just like you to consider. Our subject for the next 3 days is the mind and the power of the human mind, and whether our minds have sufficient agency to change the world. And the word mind is the same as the word man in its root, and it comes from a Proto-Indo-European stem, so we're talking around 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 years ago, men, so M-E-N, and men gives us mind and man, and actually through a little diversion, muse and museums and music. So just consider this, when we talk about men, we're not talking about creatures with male genitals, we're talking about humans with a mind. So I think, and therefore I am, part of the brotherhood of mankind. I also think it's incredibly important that we should remember, and I should just say I'm not sexist, I absolutely adore men. When you look at the deities of wisdom that exist in the world, almost without exception, the deities of wisdom are not gods, but goddesses. So maybe those ancient societies were onto something. Of course, you think of Athena here, the patron goddess of Athens, Saraswati in the Hindu religion, Benzetan in the Japanese religion, Seshat in ancient Egyptian culture, and a beautiful goddess who's not talked about enough called Nisaba, who is in Babylonian Sumerian culture, the goddess both of wisdom and of stores of grain. So that completely ties in with what's happening in Demeter, the idea that you have to give each other, society enough to eat in order for them to think. And it was a goddess who was put in charge of both those wonderful stores of wisdom and of grain. And when people met to worship Nisaba 3,000, 4,000 years ago, women and men, where they met in a room like this, they would make a vow to one another, and it's a vow which I don't think can really be bettered, and the vow is this: Ana shulmi u belatu, which means to life and to peace, shulmi being the world word for peace, which you'll recognize, which comes down to us as salam and shalom. So I say, Ana shulmi u belati, to life and to peace, and let everybody in this room, humans of all kinds, women and men, use their wit and will and wisdom to leave the world a better place. Thank you.
Wow, very cool. When you were speaking, I was thinking, rethinking how we look at the women in history, just our own view. It's from a perspective, and we were talking about this on the boat, or on the bus. It's just like our own bias, unconscious bias of how we look at women through a male gaze, even if we're not women, and how the patriarchal perspective, and how, is it possible for us to make a shift, which I think there is. So thank you so much for that. Hélène, please.
Gina, thank you so much for giving me the floor. Thank you so much to Alexandra, and thank you so much Bettany, for this incredible introduction, leading us to present time. You talked about the negation of women, although so very present in archaeological research. And I'm bringing you now into the present time because that's what struck me when I was age 14, because I wanted to become a spiritual leader in my own religious family, which was Catholicism. You know, I wanted to be age 14 an apostolic nuncio. And I was told by my local priest, well, Helen, it's going to be impossible. And I said, how come? And he said, well, because you're a woman. And I thought, how very sad that he didn't get anything about Christ's message. Because for me, Christ was probably, you know, one of the first spiritual leaders to speak with a feminine voice. And Christ definitely coming upon earth to empower women to be spiritual leaders. So I was delighted when listening to Jeremy Lent's presentation, because definitely we know by now, all of us here in this room, that it's only if we are going to be able to change the paradigm of patriarchy, we are going to change from patriarchy, maybe not to matriarchy, but to a more gender-friendly spiritual world. We talk a lot about culture, economy, social transformation. Here we talk about mind. I'm there, I think, along with the other women here, to talk about the spiritual dimension of humanity. And what a better place, Alexandra, to bring us to remind us that we humans, we mammals, it's very important to insist on this dimension, we are spiritual creatures, indeed. And for women to claim their spiritual empowerment seems to me to be a prerequisite for any kind of evolution. And when I saw on Jeremy Lent's different presentation slides the word Christian theology of liberation, I was jubilating because I wrote in 2017 this little pamphlet entitled The Eternal Through the Feminine, a manifesto for a new theology of liberation, pointing out the fact that women in all monotheisms, not only in Christianism, but also in Islam, also in the Jewish world, and to a certain extent, and Indra will comment on that, in the Buddhist world, women have been prevented from being the spiritual leaders they were meant to be. And we discussed this with Bettany as well on our way here. In the original seminal communities that were born out of these different spiritual revelations, women were empowered. When Christ came on this planet, indeed many women were around him, and Mary of Magdala was the one he chose to proclaim his resurrection, and so on and so forth. In Islam, early Islam as well, women were imams and were definitely at the forefront of spiritual communities. And to this day, we see women getting up and taking these roles, embracing these different functions. Even in the Jewish world, women also were indeed so important. And I do believe that for the human society, the human species, to be able to get to the next level of its evolution and to achieve this ecological revolution we talked about, it is impossible to do it as long as women will not be spiritually empowered and empowering for humanity. It is definitely striking me that if feminism stops at the doors of churches, of mosques, of synagogues, or temples, then feminism has failed. And it is a ticking bomb. It's dangerous for humanity. Here we are all more or less trailblazers, pushing the world forward to a greater empowerment and development. But we know that there are in humanity a vast majority of people who still respond to very patriarchal paradigms. And it is so dangerous. It creates backlashes. We see it in Pakistan, Afghanistan, but we see it all over the world. And my heart is definitely, also as a French person, as a Catholic, I'm hugely disappointed to see how the Catholic Church is not doing its revolution, its inner reformation. It is a drama, and I'm there to be like a little Greta Thunberg inside, the Catholic Church, saying, it's burning, it's burning. When Notre Dame burned, lots of people reacted completely devastated and so on. Inside of myself, I thought, hopefully, this will strike the mind of a few people that this church has been burning for quite a long time. And yes, it is a disaster because it is also a temple of the spirit for quite many people. So it needs to be purified, and offered another revolution. And I would just simply end on the quote of Teilhard de Chardin as well, who said that when humanity will discover the power of love, the revolution of love, then it will get to the next level of evolution. And I think this can only be achieved if women are spiritually empowered in all the spiritual families. And I do hope and pray and meditate with you all that we can achieve this revolution inside each and every spiritual family. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. When you were saying that the church is burning, we'll have to all become fire women and help put it out, right? And transform the way in which we view this. And also, there are many women I'm seeing that are becoming rabbis and people who are really opening their hearts and minds to seeing and reclaiming scripture in a new way. And I hope that we do get into a discussion over these next few days about religion and also opening our hearts and minds to how those early texts were written and who wrote them and how they received those messages. So I look forward to that. Thank you so much, Hélène. Indra, please.
So I'm hoping that, here we go, we've got some slides. I'm going to stand up and share some slides with you, but I'm very conscious that you've been sitting down for quite a long time. So just before I get going, can I just invite you to stand up? Just shake your legs a little bit. Yeah. Maybe stretch your arms. Thank you very much. This is kind of selfish because I can hardly bear to see you sitting down for another 10 minutes while I go through my slides. So I'm hoping, don't sit down until you're ready, shake that leg, yeah. Okay. And I'm going to come with a slightly different approach, very, very grateful for the historic perspective and the really bringing into the present, thank you, the spiritual reality of this. And maybe we'll find that I'm bringing something a little positive and maybe directly connected to Jeremy's idea of an eco-civilization. And I think the question is, if we can imagine the eco-civilization, if we can conjure it up in our heads, how are we actually going to get there? What steps can we take from here to there? And we've begun to talk already about what is missing from the system or what is really present in the public space, and I'm going to explore a bit of that. So just a very quick introduction to myself, and I'm only doing this because I want you to have a context within which I'm speaking. I could be speaking here, giving you a lifelong set of opinions, but actually I've been studying for some time to try to get to the heart of the matter. And I started very much with looking at the wider world. I was acting as a journalist and I could see the power of the media for many years of my early career. Then I began to look at what is the issue, what are the big issues of conflict, where are we disagreeing? And eventually I was persuaded that I had to go into politics at some point. Politics is implied, isn't it? That's where all the power lies. And so I was part of a political think tank, and I went and stood for Parliament in Westminster. One of the most deathly experiences of my life, I have to tell you. And then I jumped out of politics like the frog, which still had enough energy in its limbs, right? But it was on the day that one of our MPs was murdered, 5 days before Brexit, which is, you're probably all familiar with that experience that we were having in the UK. And one of our senior politicians was murdered simply for having chosen to remain with Europe. At that moment, I thought, this is it, it's over, politics is broken. And my big question in life was, what's the alternative? And since then, I've been asking that question and digging deeper and deeper. And I have to say that this question and this thing that we're looking at today, the question of where are the women? That is a big question to finding the answer to the alternative. So I'm just bringing us again into context here, this time that we're living in. Jeremy referred to it a number of times. And I noticed last year that there were two of the most popular words of last year across Europe and America were permacrisis and polycrisis. Most popular, that's quite a big thing to understand, that people are really aware that we're in trouble. Whether it's a permacrisis, meaning something we really can't do anything about this, we're in it now. We just got to prepare for the end. Or whether it's a polycrisis, it's more or less what Jeremy was describing, the many, many, many things. It's what Alexandra was describing, the many ways into the problem. Can any one of these fix it? Or is it more of a metacrisis? That's not a word that was popular, but it's become popular amongst people who are talking a lot about this. The metacrisis, the way we're thinking about it, the way we're talking about it, and it kind of brings us to here. Can we change our minds? If we change our minds, can we solve the problem? But right at the heart of the crisis is this feeling of disconnection. And, in the world of politics, you'll be familiar, or in the world of social politics, you'll be familiar with the idea that the problem is individualism, right? Everybody's too individually focused. On the other hand, other people will say the problem is socialism. We can't organize ourselves well. Individuals have to be responsible. So, communities are sort of degraded in some way. And on another level, people are thinking, no, this is a global problem, there's nothing we can do to sort it. It's become obvious to me that unless you can relate the personal to the collective, to the global, we're not going to solve this problem. So number one, whatever way we're looking at it, we have to address this idea that it's all about our psychosocial grief. It's about the trauma at the heart of our system that each one of us is carrying. Or is it about our divided, powerless communities? Politics makes us divided, makes us powerless. Or is it simply that the planet is dying? Can we move this through being able to integrate these three realms of holistic human agency, reconnected communities, leading to a living, flourishing planet? Is that possible, the ecological civilization that Jeremy was describing? This, for me, is the task, the moving into connectedness of the realms. Let's think about it just for a second. I'm sure every one of you can imagine yourself as an individual human being, can't you? You know your life, my life. I have my boundaries, I have my family, I have my friends. However, does that stop you from thinking of yourself as a community being? You live in your community, you're part of that community, right? You're part of the place in which you live, and you're part of what we call collective affinities, people you choose to be with. And then you think about the planet, you're on the planet, you care about the planet. Maybe these things are not disconnected at all. So looking at it from this perspective, this really big perspective, it's very easy from a woman's perspective to think about the current situation we're in as a problem of the patriarchy. Because after all, the public space that we're experiencing, almost without exception, was designed by men, to be occupied by men and controlled by men. So surely it's their fault, right? It's an easy conclusion. However, when we think about the fact that men themselves are the greatest victims of that patriarchy, then we can't anymore exclude them from the way that we go about trying to find the solutions. It is surely the wrong way to be as a woman, to exclude anyone. So from this moment, we bring the men with us, especially to save them from the patriarchy. So if men historically designed the public space, the one that we're all grappling with now, that is an act of the past, what were women doing all of this time? And I would say women also had status and incredible meaning and purpose all of this time. We might describe that as designing the private space and the personal space. For many women, they worked from home and they raised children. They were responsible for creating somewhere that wherever you were in the world, when you came back to this place, you came back to the possibility of wholeness. You could find yourself again in this space. When you come home, you have, if you're lucky, of course, I'm not talking now about homes that might be broken or homes that might have been too disempowered, but even homes without many material possessions can create wholeness for children and even for strangers. So this quality of being able to create space for individuals to come back to their wholeness when they come out of the public space has historically been held by women. And in a way, it's not been difficult to do because nature gives us so many patterns and examples of what this wholeness might look like. Whether they're circles, mycelial networks, seeds and pods. What we've understood by this coming back to wholeness is that every complex system, and each one of us, human beings, are in complex systems. They need an incubator to grow. Nobody grows on a straight line. Every living thing needs a space to become itself within. And this is in itself an important quality that is perhaps been lost and understood in the public space. So that place where you become whole is the place where you get your emotional needs met. Human beings are designed at the stem level to become social beings because through being a social being, you can get your needs met, your material needs met. But to become a social being, you have to get your emotional needs met. So I think you'd all recognize by looking at this list here, the need for attention, the need for belonging, the need for intimacy, the need for privacy. These are things that you don't easily get out there in the public world. You have to come home to somewhere to find these things. And traditionally, this has been where women have been the most skilled and the most able to develop nurturing. However, where is this conscious, what I would call the conscious feminine, where is it today? Of course, history has invited women, because of the inequality of receiving material reward for what they do, has obliged women to go out into the public space and to leave the home. This has not been a bad thing at all, of course. It's been very important for the world of business, the world of society, to benefit from women being in the public space, and that it's been important for women too. I'm not for a second suggesting that women should be in the home. The question is, where has that quality that used to be held in that space, where is it being held today, which I call the conscious feminine? Where are we getting our emotional needs met? And I think most of you would understand very quickly that business has designed itself to meet our emotional needs through consumerism. So if today you want to have status, you buy a handbag. If you want to feel belonging, you make sure you're drinking the right drink, right? Consumerism has designed itself to meet our emotional needs so that we are under the illusion that we're getting our emotional needs met. However, because it doesn't actually meet our emotional needs, it becomes more like an addiction. There's a big promise. The promise of fulfillment coming from consumerism has us addicted to buying stuff. How can we reclaim our spaces for getting our emotional needs met? So because we've kind of moved past, historically, this place of women in the home developing something, men in the public space developing what's really important, where all the power lies, I've shifted from talking about men and women and talking more about circles and triangles. Because I feel that when I can talk about a triangle, it's quite easy to describe those qualities that have disconnected us from nature. So triangles, pointed, forward, progressive thinking, combative, arrow-like, left brain, meaning very focused on outcomes, binary, meaning when you have two things, they oppose each other, hierarchical, risk-friendly, very hard, and of course, that describes the patriarchy to some extent. So what does being a circle mean? The circle means being rounded, space-holding, connected, networked, empathetic, holistic, whole-brain being, contextual maybe, dual rather than binary, risk-averse maybe, caring, circular, fluid. That might describe matriarchy. So I'm asking anyone in this room, male or female, are you more triangle or are you more circle? Because today, as Jeremy proved very well, men can be as circular conscious as triangle conscious.
Like, I don't want to do anything to make money. I don't.
Sorry, somehow this video
terrible
is a
to
TikTok
add
video
the
just
young
running
age
by
of
itself. I
23.
didn't
I'm ready
intend
to
that.
check out. Like,
But I
don't
wanted to
wanna do
describe that
anything at
we've
all.
been
I
in a
don't wanna work 'cause
30-year
my money's not mine.
revolution.
I don't want to go to school because
In a way, the private and the public space have become one thing. We don't have the division anymore between the private and the public, because when you're on social media, you'll find that you're as much on the private as you are in the public. So this is now a possibility of a very great revolution. Spaces of what I call the conscious feminine are emerging, spaces where we can be instantly connected and become whole. During COVID in particular, a lot of people recognized this and experienced coming into connection with people, listening to them as human beings, holding the space for each other. In many ways, technology is now providing the very thing that we lost when we lost the power of the home. And more importantly, maybe, and this is something that I've been observing over the last 7 years since I started The Alternative, is this phenomenon of what I'm calling cosmolocal community agency networks. You'll recognize this. People in a community coming together, trying to answer the major problems of that community, largely connected to nature and to the land. Jeremy described some of them, often using permaculture, prepared to grow their own food to some extent, but mostly creating space for each other to be heard and to listen. So this phenomenon of community agency networks has been growing over a couple of decades, actually. Would include things like transition towns, cooperatives, but also mutual aid networks. And in each case, in each of these communities, they're building their own initiatives and listening to people and inviting people to contribute. As these come into being and they're connected to each other, there is a real sense of this conscious feminine coming into being, using technology to generate something that's really moving. So here, just to describe how technology helps cosmo-local communities to be connected. These are not just appearing in the northern hemisphere by any means, they're appearing in the southern hemisphere too, whether it's neighborocracy in India, the cans in Africa. These cans are really appearing everywhere as a kind of human phenomenon. So do we have a chance then to move from this idea of ourselves as homo economicus, meaning only concerned with material things, needing a tax cut and so on, to human beings that can connect not only internally to ourselves, but to our communities and to the planet? Certainly, the mechanisms and technology is appearing. I'm just using this here. This is a presentation actually I gave to NATO about 10 years ago, where I described this relationship between the triangles and the circles. And I suggested that until now, we've moved as triangles on the outside with circles on the inside. So the triangles being the patriarchy leading the way with some sense of an internal self that maybe needs to be reckoned with. And I suggested to them that the shift really has got to be to put the circle on the outside, to start thinking more consciously about the feminine, about connectedness, about the planet, about nature. Let's make that the thing that we're consciously thinking of, and then still we can hold the triangle within us, the desire to progress, the desire to be inventive, to be ingenious. It should never leave us. You might not be surprised that I was heckled by the military, by the men there, but there were some that understood what I was trying to say. And I think that time has come. So then, to be here today in Eleusis with this myth and this possibility, I just want to emphasize that all that I've been describing is possible now. This new idea of what it means to be consciously feminine and to bring the consciously feminine into the public space is already with us. However, unless we pay attention to it, unless we invest in it, it may forever be just something we talk about in a place like this. And I'd like to just close with that beautiful image of Demeter helping Persephone come into the being and ask us to realize together what's needed and to give our attention to the conscious feminine and to invest ourselves in it for the future. At that point, I can feel hope. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wow, I'm so honored to be up here with the three of you. I got lucky. My number was picked. You know, you said that there's an awareness, people are aware that we're in crisis. And it was said by Jeremy, by others, how there are pockets and places of people that are doing things. There are people that are gathering. There are people that are coming together. And how lucky we are to be at the World Human Forum and have a space and a place where we too can come together to talk about these ideas and to talk about just how we can shift consciousness. I'm going to ask one question, and then maybe there's other people. So think about if you have a question for any of these amazing women that are here today. But I guess my question is, what and I might have the language wrong, but what do you think it really is systemically that the patriarchy was so afraid of, that they had to squash the matriarchy, the feminine? Why is it that potentially the quote-unquote masculine energy, whatever it was, was it just, some man who was feeling left out, and so he started writing all the scriptures and the books and decided to put someone down because that one person or multiple persons felt shunned? What was it, in fact? Why were we so discriminated and pushed aside? And the second part of that question, which is what I always feel about war, which is, because I always think, well, is it just the guns? Was it the guns that did it? Because if you didn't have guns, who would really win the battle? Because it's not always the strongest. Sometimes it's the person with the most wit or the clever. So that's sort of a dual question. But really, why? Well, what are they so afraid of?
I mean, I might have a go. Obviously, we could be here for the next 7 days debating that question, and it's incredibly nuanced, and it's really important not to be prescriptive in terms of the answer. And just something to kind of to add to what we've all been saying, I think it's also incredibly important to recognize, as with that goddess Inanna, who said a woman can become a man and a man can become a woman, we actually have a much more kind of binary idea about gender and sexuality than existed in the ancient world. Aphrodite, this goddess, as I said, who's come down to us as Venus with kind of long blonde hair and a little pink dress normally. In many sanctuaries in Greece, she's shown with a beard, so there was, there's a whole world of nuance that we should be exploring in terms of ancient understanding, as said, of gender and sexuality. But just to kind of answer that question about what happened, this is really, really, really broad brushstrokes, and obviously there isn't a single answer, but actually it relates directly to what Jeremy was saying, is that in the broadest sense, what we see in the Bronze Age is that there's a moment where communities and societies become stable. So there are enough women producing enough healthy children for societies to have enough humans in them to sustain themselves. But what happens, and this is both the kind of beauty and the horror of the human experience and of civilization, and our mad, crazy brains that just are whirring the whole time and always wanting new things, always craving disruption, is that what drives civilization is that we always raven for more. We raven for what we don't have. So, we're sitting there in Thebes, but we think, wouldn't it be nice if we had Argos as well? We have beautiful gold earrings, in the shape of bees, and we think, oh, but actually I'd really fancy a necklace which has got lapis lazuli in it, so I need to try and get that from another land. So it's this absolute conundrum of the human species. It's what propels us to think brilliant thoughts and to do brilliant things, but we always want more. And what you see at that moment in civilization, I said this is very, very, very broad, is that it's around 3,600 years ago we get the first presence of a single smiting male god in a number of cultures. And that single smiting male god is there because you're beginning to get the advent of a more militarized society, not because of war for war's sake, but because people, if you're going to go and take someone else's territory, if you're going to go and occupy a lapis lazuli mine, you physically need muscle to do that. So it's at that point when actually all humans, not just men, but kind of women in those societies wanted more, you begin to see the militarization of society, and that's where almost exactly you see the downgrading of goddesses and of priestesses in society. So there are lots of answers, and I've just given, as I said, that's a really broad brushstroke, but that relates exactly to what Jeremy was saying, is how do we be ourselves as a species, which is want disruption, want to change things, want beautiful things, want beauty, want to travel, want to see new things, to build beautiful monuments. How do we balance that with it being entirely sustainable, both in terms of society and the Earth's resources? So I think that is possibly the answer. So it's more physical and practical than emotional.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all got an answer for this, right? And first of all, we have to agree, if we're going to ask this question, that there is such a thing as men and women and that we're different. You know, so if we're in this conversation, we're taking that as a given. And then part of what I noticed when my son was growing up is that the differences do play out and they do make themselves known. And at a certain age, probably beginning of from 7 onwards, and I'm speaking now from a psychotherapeutic point of view as well, the emphasis on different activities becomes noticeable. So the boys more game playing, more throwing themselves into an open space. This gets more and more as they are, you know, enjoying risk taking and so on. The girls, more relationship building. So quite strategic almost in their relationship building and getting very quick and smart at that. And this seems to be how they're developing faster. So there becomes there's a gulf. But in the playground, that doesn't work out very well. And quite often I could see boys being humiliated by girls early on, simply because they had one way of enjoying themselves and the girls had another way. And quite often it was overwhelming, you know, to be told or to be asked to think about this or care about that, or when you didn't really, you were more interested in the game that was going on. So I saw an early shaming going on of boys, which I then saw them quickly separate. You know, the boys hanging out with the boys and the girls hanging out with the girls. And that just was an observation. Later on, much more recently, when I hear Ian McGilchrist talk about the divided brain and about the left brain being really responsible for so much of what we've created, this focus-orientated world, still we're in the world where the whole brain, all the context that we didn't really notice until now, overwhelms that. I think it's quite fear of overwhelm, actually, that causes so much backlash and so much hatred.
I asked actually Gina this question to Dalai Lama when I met him twice on 2 occasions. And basically, first, obviously he has always a lot of humor. He said he wishes to be reincarnated in a woman in his next life, which was nice to hear. But anyway, he would agree with Bettany, saying that mainly it's the patriarchal culture and economic organization, as you described it, that has prevented the feminine to take its right place in the spiritual families. But I think the initial intention in all the various spiritual families was precisely to overcome patriarchy and to offer another model where matriarchy and patriarchy work together, where there is a harmony with the yin and the yang. So I think for the moment, as we see the different spiritual families functioning, when they are not giving the floor equally to men and women, I think we are in a heresy. It's a heresy. We are not being given the spiritual message as it should be delivered. And there are many theologians exploring and explaining this, and that we are not allowing humanity to be spiritually empowered because of this lack of spirituality, precisely. You know, we have limited religions to being not spiritual. They should be vehicles of the spiritual, and they are not. They are on the ground, you know, it's like a rocket that never took off, which is incredible.
Thank you. I am told by Goddess Myrto that we're running out of time. So first, please, a round of applause for this incredible panel and discussion. Bettany Hughes, Hélène Pichon, Indra Adnan, thank you so much for your wisdom, and I hope that throughout the days you will find them if you have questions to ask. I do have an announcement. For those of you who are participating in the full pass, I'm trying to get the right terminology. I wrote it down somewhere. The 3-day pass, thank you. There is and will be an experience happening back here for the few that have signed up to participate that will hopefully take you on a journey where you will see how music can shift and change your mind and transform your mind and heart. So those of you who are wondering about that and want to partake in that, that will be happening over in the back here. And I want to thank you again, and thank you all so much for listening.